Now, we've been looking at character encoding that we send in the URL string, but there's also something else we need to be careful of, which is that sometimes we're going to generate the actual HTML that we're going to put in our document. We want to make sure that we send proper and legal HTML, or we might not get the results we expect. For example, let's say that we had text like this, and the link that we wanted for our HTML was less than, click, greater than, with an ampersand, you'll see. Now, especially these are going to be problematic for HTML because it's going to think that this must be some kind of an HTML entity that we're not going to want to allow to display inside our link. So let's go ahead and bring that up in our browser. Let's go back and open up firstpage.php, and you'll see that click actually disappeared. What we need to do is we need to turn these into encoded entities that HTML will allow to take place. You may be familiar with what those are in HTML. For the ampersand, it would be and AMP semicolon. For greater than and less than, it's and GT semicolon and LT semicolon. There's a whole bunch of them for all the different characters that you can have to make sure that HTML encodes them properly. But we can handle that in PHP as well. Let's go ahead and put a block of PHP up here at the top of this page. PHP. And let's create a variable. Let's call it link text. Something like that. So now I've got the click and you'll see inside link text. And then down here, all I have to do is drop in some PHP to refer to it. Let me just make a new line here. And then we'll do PHP echo back the link text. We know how to do that. Now that didn't help gain us anything. All we've done is generate link text from PHP, but we haven't encoded it. We don't want to use our URL encode because we're actually not doing a URL encode, and we don't want to turn all those spaces into either %20 or plus signs. Instead, what we want to use is a different kind of encoding, which is going to be called HTML special chars or characters. And we're going to put our closing braces around link text. And that's now going to encode it for us so that HTML will allow it. Let's save that, go back to first page, and now we get what we expected. And if we view source on that, I'll go to view and page source, you'll see that we got the and less than semicolons and the ampersand and everything. So PHP was helpful in that it went ahead and gave us something that was more useful to HTML than what we might have accidentally sent to it. And if we're going to be pulling things out of the database, we have no guarantee of what kind of information is in that database. And same thing for when we accept form data from a user. We don't necessarily know what the user typed in the form, but we can escape the special characters using HTML special characters function to make sure that HTML is handled appropriately. We've escaped them all so that they don't have HTML meaning anymore. Now, with all of these encodings, you might be wondering, how do you keep track of which one to use when? And so I want to give you a real quick, simple guide on how you can do that. Let's create a new page where we can put this, and that way you can refer back to it if you ever have questions. I'll save first page, just to make sure I have a good copy of what I was working with. And then I'll do a save as well. And I'm going to call this one encoding.php. I'll save it in my sandbox. Now this is not first page anymore. And we can go ahead and actually get rid of second page as well. We're done working with that. And so now we're just going to be working with this new file called encoding. So let's say that we were going to auto-generate a URL in our application. So the page name and all the parameters and everything would all be generated by PHP. We don't know what it's going to be ahead of time. To simulate that, let's set up some variables. I've got a couple here. I've created URL page, which I've just made up into a fictional PHP created page URL.php. Now, obviously, that doesn't exist, but I wanted you to know that this is a page that's been created by PHP, a page name, a whole path. And the parameter that we've set as parameter 1 is going to be this is a string, and we're going to want to pass that along to our next page. And so we'll know we need to encode that because it has spaces in it. And then we have parameter 2, which has a whole bunch of bad characters in it. So there's double quote marks in there, there's forward slashes, less than, greater than, and even a $sign. And then we've got our link text that we're going to want to display in the end. So how can we put together a URL that's going to be encoded and not break for us? Let's start a new block of PHP and do that. So we're going to start by having a URL, and we're going to create something that's just going to be at http://localhost. And I'm going to go ahead and put the trailing slash on the end of it. And then I'm going to append onto the end of that using our period equals. And I'm going to put in the URL page. Now, URL page on its own might have some characters that need escaping in there. So we need to URL encode it. But because it's before the question mark in the path, we're going to want to raw URL encode that. Then let's do the same thing. We're going to append on the end of the URL that we're working with our first parameter. So it's going to actually be the question mark, and then we'll just call it param1, and then equals. And then the next thing we want to append onto it is going to be that value, param1. But we're going to need to encode that as well, because we want to make sure that those spaces are handled appropriately. So we're going to put a URL encode on that. And we're going to do that because it's after the question mark. And then let's do the same thing with our second parameter, which has all of its bad characters in it. And then now I have the URL constructed that I would like to have happen when users click. So our href now, we go ahead and just take all of this out. Our href here is going to just be a bit of PHP that says echo our URL, right? And then we already know that we're going to need to HTML escape our special characters here, the link text. We also are going to need to HTML escape the parameters, because especially if these parameters came from a user, or it's possible that someone could have typed HTML into that bar at the top. And we want to make sure that it's not inadvertently executed. So we're going to use our HTML special characters. I'm just going to paste it in there around the URL as well. So now I've generated something that's safe to click on and will give me something that's usable in the URL string. That's what I did in this block of PHP. This gives me, in fact, I'll go ahead and put a comment in here and say, this gives you a clean link to use. And then down here where we've done the HTML characters, I'm going to go ahead and just drop down and put another comment and say HTML special characters escapes any HTML that might do bad things to your HTML page. So we've done two things there. We've cleaned up the link so that we can use it, and then we've done our HTML special characters. We've escaped it so that we can display that link. So keep in mind, there's two separate things that are going on there. Here we're making sure that it's safe to display it on the page, and we're escaping it for that reason. Here we're making something that's going to be usable when it's used as a URL string. So refer to this. If you're not clear, play around with it a little bit. We can go ahead and load up that page here and see what it gives us. Encoding. And you'll see that it gave us the same thing, and it gave us a nice usable link and everything. It's all going to work. It doesn't go anywhere. If we actually click on it, you'll see it comes up and says it's not found. But we can actually look here and see what it did and what it gave us and how it's going to be usable. So hopefully that technique will help explain it to you and you'll understand what's going on. If you're not using dynamically generated page names, obviously you don't have to worry about that. But you will want to URL encode any of the parameters that you drop in and use HTML special characters. And we'll look at some ways to handle that more efficiently when we start building applications.